Thank you for having me here today. Welcome to Adversary Detection Pipelines, finally making your threat intel useful. Today, I'm going to talk about how to get more out of your threat intel. I'm Zena Olson, also known as Cheerio on Twitter. I'm a Blue Team Village senior lead, a doctoral student in cybersecurity at Marymount University, a cyber threat intelligence or CTI analyst, SANS Women's Academy graduate. I have an MBA in IT management, 7 GX certs, and I'm a huge Disney fan. Also, I'll be sharing a lot of really good resources in this talk, so I created a repo for you at the bit.ly link. But before we get started, I have a quick note from the lawyers. I'm not speaking on behalf of my employers. The opinions I express are mine alone. I'm here in my own individual capacity, and the use of SIZE Purple Team Exercise Framework later in this talk does not endorse them as a vendor. So let's get started. To set the theme of this talk, I'll be using the lyrics from songs of an international pop star, Taylor Swift. I made a custom Spotify playlist with all the songs I used in this presentation, along with a few extras. So you can find the link to the playlist on the GitHub repo in the bit.ly link. So when Taylor Swift sings that you'll never find another one like her, that translates to how there isn't a one-size-fits-all for a company's threat landscape, because every org is different and unique. In this talk, I will not focus on the Microsofts, the Targets, the Walmarts, the Googles of the world, meaning the more mature CTI or cyber threat intelligence teams, nor will I focus on government entities or critical infrastructure. Instead, I'll be focusing on pretty much everyone else. So first, I'm going to discuss some pain points that are specific to CTI. If you ask around, there are security professionals that are not happy with CTI. I've heard of people getting outdated intelligence, copy-paste reports, not timely intel that isn't relevant to your org, or you're only getting IOCs, indicator of compromise, or IOCs. Instead of looking at what is actually going on their networks and threat landscape, I've heard some CTI analysts solely focusing on public threat actor reporting and going for the sexy APTs, which is advanced persistent threats, such as Fancy Bear, which is a Russian-based threat actor publicly linked to intrusions into the German Bundestag and France's TV5 Monde station in April 2015. So another issue facing CTI is that the teams are all in silos and they aren't talking or sharing projects or what they're working on. And in some orgs, red teams kind of do their own thing and decide operations based on the latest shiny hack that's out there. Think Mr. Robot. So, instead of looking at org-specific adversaries and TTPs. In some organizations, CTI is fighting an uphill battle. Some intel vendors might have ulterior motives and trying to get you to buy their product when it doesn't necessarily suit your threat model. And I've heard some managers just don't understand the importance of blocked attacks or the collection of forensic artifacts for the CTI team. And I don't know if you know this, but threat intel managers, they're a very, very special kind of manager because they need to be aware of their use of logical fallacies and cognitive bias. Otherwise, it could kind of undermine the threat intel team's efforts. So finally, office politics, and I don't need to elaborate or get into that one. So how can CTI provide more value to the organization while overcoming some of the obstacles I mentioned? How can CTI help teams get out of their silos and work together? I started asking myself these questions and a few more, and it ended up leading me down a rabbit hole to discover if it is possible to come up with a reasonable solution that almost any CTI analyst can use to create a baseline of their org's threat landscape. So the goal is to produce meaningful threat intelligence products. So this talk will hopefully shed some light on what I've found over the course of over 2 years and give you some ideas to incorporate at your org. So first we'll explore attribution, then we'll move on to TTPs or tactics, techniques, and procedures. We'll discuss some ideas for filtering threats, and finally, adversary detection pipelines. So attribution is hard. For the purposes of this talk, I will solely focus on private companies, where attribution may not be as important as it might be for governments or critical infrastructure. In this section also, when I refer to attribution, I mean true attribution, where you find out who actually did it. So even if you get all of the forensic information, such as keyboard used, libraries, languages used, compiler used, compile time, metadata, code styles, resource language, C2 check-in, mutex, names, kernel tags, and more, you would still need other evidence, or possibly to include other parties, such as law enforcement, government agencies, or outside consulting firms for true attribution. In Tim Mauer's Cyber Mercenaries, the State, Hackers, and Power, he discusses the use of independent hackers to act as a proxy for nation-state actors. So how would you tell the difference between a proxy and the actual source of the attack? I know I couldn't. Another issue with attempting to do true attribution is false flag operations, where the attackers purposefully create misleading artifacts to throw researchers off their trail. A really great example of this is the Olympic Destroyer operation. It was originally thought to be North Korea, then Russia, with some things that look like a Chinese APT, but still no solid attribution. So, for more in-depth discussion of false flag operations, check out Jake Williams' talk at Black Hat Europe 2019 called Conducting a Successful False Flag Operation. So, in summary, about attribution, most orgs do not need it, nor is it worth the time, effort, and expense. True attribution is not going to be considered in the adversary detection model. Instead, we're going to use the diamond model along with TTPs to form activity groups based upon internal attack data that we then name for the ease of explaining data. So let's talk about behaviors, tactics, techniques, and procedures for the adversary. I'm interested in looking at stuff that does something bad, instead of focusing on a few adversaries that may or may not actually be attacking my org. So MITRE ATT&CK offers a great free training resource on how to make TTPs by Katie Nichols and Adam Pennington, and I recommend checking that out. So we want to create a solution to support other teams. The Pyramid of Pain by David J. Bianca provides a perfect illustration of increasing the effort of attackers through the use of TTPs. It is trivial to generate a new hash, but far more difficult to change how an attacker compromises an organization. We want to increase the difficulty and the time the adversary has to invest to pwn us. TTPs, to me, means that I am interested in how an attacker does something versus why they did it or who is doing it. An adversary detection pipeline is about sharing the behaviors of attacks impacting your org and setting up other teams for success. Bryson Bort, CEO and founder of Scythe, points out that TTPs allow you to look at the controls, detection, and response across all the stages of the attack path for your org. That's why TTPs are critical to building out the adversary detection pipeline. So focusing on TTPs can help other teams too. For instance, if I give domains and IPs to Red Team, that won't be as helpful as sharing actual behaviors or TTPs so that Red can build out their adversary emulation operation. Adam Pennington at DEF CON 28 Red Team Village, a talk called Emulating an Adversary with Imperfect Intelligence. He talks about dependencies for techniques and other helpful tips in building out an adversary detection or adversary emulation plan based on open source reporting. So, focusing on TTPs might seem simple, but as John, the senior director of Mandiant Threat Intelligence, points out, attackers will use what works, even if it's simple. One of the main goals of adversary detection pipelines is to get really good at understanding simple attacks specific to your org's infrastructure, controls, and detection. Joe, a seasoned threat intelligence professional, points out many attackers will take the path of least resistance to get the job done. Even Verizon's data breach investigation report in 2020 showed that attackers are favoring stolen credentials for breaches. So, why develop a zero-day or a complex attack when you can just steal creds? Former FBI Director Robert Mueller says there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. So the adversary detection pipeline model works from a place of assumed breach. If this malware or whatever attack it is bypasses our controls, what will it do? How will it operate in your environment? What are the TTPs? From there, you can work with other teams to better understand your visibility, detection, and response. The purpose of threat intelligence is to be actionable. So here's an example of how you can use TTPs. So these are some of the behaviors of the attack coming at the org, of the attacks coming at the org. We have X% coverage with our controls, detection for X%, and are in the process of addressing X gaps through actions X, Y, and Z. This provides meaningful and organization-specific metrics and shows due diligence to your shareholders, your investors, management, senior management, as well as a justification for any security products you have. So now that I've shared why TTPs are favored versus true attribution, let's look at how TTPs could help other teams. So now we're going to use initiatives to basically filter the entire internet. It's going to take time and it's going to take some work, but it's worth it. So for the business initiatives, I usually recommend looking at the management discussion for the 10K, 10Q, or the annual report, or whatever goals report you have for your organization. For the department and security team, I really recommend having conversations with the various teams at your org, whether it's red or purple or blue or hunt. And then also too, generally, these security teams will have goals or initiatives they have to meet each quarter or each year. And what you could do is find those out and then figure out how to help them with whatever it is they're trying to do. And then, of course, the CTI team can basically create the baseline for a lot of these deliverables so that you can track stuff over time. Scott J. Roberts in CTI squad goal setting requirements and Brian P. Keim in threat intel planning, they offer some good suggestions on some basic ideas around the operational environment of your org. So one of them is reviewing industry verticals, reviewing the threat actors that historically attacked your verticals, and then looking at the threats and threat actors that attacked your org, and then also to assessing the internal and external exposure. So you want to run attack scenarios and understand the attack progression. So you go from external to internal and then internal to external so that you get a good idea. You are going to need to make sure you're collecting some data. So, in a 2019 CTI survey, Rebecca Brown and Robert M. Lee share some suggested data collection sources. So, internally, you can look at your internal tickets, your WAF, email analysis, endpoint, IDS, on and on. Open source reporting, you can look at white papers, threat reports, researchers, news, DOJ indictments. And then there's sharing groups. So you have the ISACs, the CERTs, the TLP Amber and Bread private Intel groups, and then finally threat feeds and Intel vendors. You also need to prioritize your threats. So you look at the intent, opportunity, and capability of the attackers with respect to threats to your org. David G. Bianco and Kat Self, in their talk at SANS Threat Hunting and IR Europe Summit 2020, shared a method of prioritizing hunting using polar geometry. You can adapt this to CTI when prioritizing threats too. The diamond model can help you structure your pivoting. It can also be used to make activity groups. So you gotta get kind of creative and use the diamond model in a way that works for your org. Here's a suggestion. Start with your email data, both blocked and delivered, to get a baseline on your org specific threat landscape. If you see the repetitive use of infrastructure and capability vertices of the diamond model in your attack data, you can group those attacks as a threat activity group and name it as an easier way to convey data, such as Zero Cool or Fuzzy Snuggly Duck. Next, you can focus on other internal sources, such as SOC or defer tickets. So we just laid the foundation for adversary detection pipelines. Next, we'll explore it further. So the analysis of organization-specific threats via structured and unstructured formats for an adversary detection pipeline focused on business, departmental, and CTI initiatives. What does that mean? Basically, I'm going to use the initiatives with the focus on TTPs and behaviors, pulling from email attack data, internal sources, and publicly available data to filter out threats that do not impact my org. So imagine these are all the possible threats on the internet. How do we make this more manageable? You can narrow your focus based upon the initiatives that are specific to your org. The purpose of the CTI team initiative is to create a threat landscape specific to the org that you track over time so you can spot anomalies. It's also to prioritize organization-specific threats and to build out deliverables for other teams. So using email attack data, you have a source of data that can give you info on the various ransomware variants sent to your org, malware, phishing campaigns, business email compromise, and any other attacks. So through looking at all of the email data, including the blocked, you can gain a better understanding of the type of TTPs that are being used against your org prior to the post-exploitation phase. When you incorporate the assumed breach model in conjunction with looking at the TTPs of the email attack data, you can get involved in proactive security practices through ensuring you have visibility, detection, and security controls. This table shows you the blocked, delivered, and clicked malicious emails. So this can be used to prioritize work to give to other teams, such as looking at the TTPs associated with the clicked or delivered campaigns first. You can take it a step further and prioritize looking at actors that show a high click rate of delivered messages. What sets that particular activity group apart from the others? So this heat map is just a fancy way of grouping attacks based on the diamond model. Then, instead of listing out the infrastructure and capabilities of the attack in a really long sentence, You give it a name. So the names can represent various activity groups specific to your org. You can use this to prioritize intelligence products you create for other teams. Then you can get the TTPs for the various threat activity groups and throw them into MITRE ATT&CK's Navigator to see what overlaps. Then from here, you can prioritize those techniques for purple exercises, hunt activities, adversary emulation, and more. You can also use other internal sources for the adversary detection pipelines, such as incident data, internal monitoring, intel vendors, and sharing groups. OSINT and publicly available threat reports, white papers, and pretty much anything else in the public domain can also be used to supplement and build out adversary detection pipelines. So here's an example. If you know an APT is targeting other companies in your vertical through private intel sharing groups, you can then look at public reporting to offset any gaps in your knowledge. So I break down the data into structured and unstructured formats based upon Joshua Stevens' 2015 RSAC talk called Hunting for the Undefined Threat, Advanced Analytics and Visualization, where basically the unstructured format equals the undefined threat and new TTPs, and the structured format equals searching known threats such as IOCs, TTPs, and real-time analysis. So there was already structured data in the form of email attack data, IOCs, and public reports, known TTPs, but I hadn't addressed the unstructured nature of hypothesis-driven threat hunting until I came across Matt Bromley's SANS analyst paper on thinking like a hunter, implementing a threat hunting program. And he gave me the idea to reverse engineer Hunt to determine what they would need for their from their CTI team. So what you see is the result of my interpretation of that paper from a CTI perspective. So you take a specific time frame with known badness for a particular area of the network so Hunt can form hypotheses. So you can do this by grouping, for example, email attack data, or providing high-level behaviors for threat actors that were scanning your network for a specified quarter, or even group the threats other FIs share for a specified time frame with the behaviors, so Hunt can hunt. You can also create threat actor dossiers based upon email attack data and incident tickets. These are helpful for SOC to know who is targeting you, helpful for red team emulation, helpful for purple team exercises, and maybe even Hunt to form hypotheses. You can measure and track what is going on in different areas of your org, departments, and people that are being attacked. You can track the various deliverables and projects using a Gantt chart or whatever other tracking means you have for all the initiatives and intelligence requirements you have. So to oversimplify the adversary detection pipelines, they provide a prioritized workflow based upon the attacks directed at the org through analysis performed by the CTI analyst. It is the focused creation of intelligence based upon specific intelligence requirements for the sole purpose of enriching other teams and improving the security posture of the organization. You can also do reports and metrics. You can track purple team ops, track Hunt, track GEPs, and I recommend also documenting communication and procedural shifts as a result of implementing the adversary detection pipelines. So the use of business, departmental, and security team and CTI initiatives to filter the entire internet and look at three things. So the email attack data, internal sources such as defer, SOC tickets, monitoring, private intel sharing groups, industry vertical, private sharing groups, intel vendors, and third, open source reporting to produce actionable intelligence and create an adversary detection pipeline for the blue, red, and purple teams to use to search for badness, to emulate the badness, and better understand the org's controls, detection, and response capabilities. Oh, and one more thing. I'm going to show you how to tie everything together with a practical example incorporating the CTI, departmental, and business initiatives for the adversary detection pipeline. So let's say in the business's annual report, X team is leading a program to form partnerships for a new incentives program that is revenue generating for the org. So, keeping an eye on the department, you notice a campaign that is being sent specifically to those people associated with the project. Purple just happens to have an exercise coming up, and you know how important it is to the org to support the revenue generating incentives program, so why not create a purple exercise out of it? So this is where SAI's Purple Team exercise framework comes in, and we'll start at the cyber threat intelligence arrow. We're also going to incorporate a threat intelligence process for the purple teaming using Eric Van Buggenhout's threat intel process. So understanding the org adversary detection pipelines can help you understand your org. Identify the adversary. Of course, adversary detection pipelines can help you identify and prioritize threats impacting your organization. So you noticed the targeted attacks to the people involved in the new revenue generating business initiative through looking at the blocked email data that you are tracking as part of the adversary detection pipeline. Oh, and as a reminder for Purple Team exercises, you can use the threat actor heat maps to see the activity and prioritize Purple Team operations based on delivery or even clicked messages and the associated TTPs. You can also use the MITRE ATT&CK Navigator to view all the TTPs for your threat activity groups to help you prioritize your Purple Team exercises. Also, Purple Team exercises do not have to be only about emulating behaviors of attacks in a specific sequence. You can run exercises based upon whatever works for your org and your resources available. So you can supplement the email attack data with any incident data, sharing group intel, or publicly available threat reports, and of course, open source reporting. So remember, we are extracting the TTPs to provide value to the org so that your security team can look at the controls, detection, and response for all the stages of the attack path for your organization. So as you get further into this, and you might want to get better at malware analysis and understanding what it is that you're looking at. Coleman Kane, a PhD candidate and senior cyber threat intelligence research analyst, has some great malware analysis materials. Also, Monapa K.A., he's an information security investigator at Cisco. He has a great book called Learning Malware Analysis, and in it, he goes through and uses memory forensic techniques to analyze malware to extract the behaviors. It's a really good book. I recommend it. So we're going to use MITRE ATT&CK's tactics to guide the research and extraction of the TTPs. And the process I use throughout this is I looked at Joe's Sandbox and the MITRE ATT&CK section. Then I looked at the Joe Sandbox specific entry in the report. Then I pivoted to Atomic Red Team for the technique. Then I looked at the YAML contents, and whatever wasn't there, I Googled the rest. So also too, for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to provide highlights of extracting TTPs. So it's an email with an exe attachment. And whether or not an org blocks XE attachments, what I'm interested in are the behaviors of these campaigns, since they are targeting people involved in a new revenue generating business initiative. So that is why we are taking an assumed breach approach. Execution. So when you look at the specific section of the malware report, do your best to get the specific campaigns that so that it can help adversary emulation. So for T1047, I couldn't find the Atomic Red Team test that fit my use case initially. So then I had to do a bunch of Googling and I found what I needed on Stack Overflow. And it wasn't until later in this exercise of extracting the TTPs that I found an atomic test under a different technique name that worked for my use case. So keep in mind when you're building this out to look at other techniques just in case. Privilege escalation. So getting the command line arguments are important. I pivoted from Joe Sandbox to Malware Bazaar, found the sample, and I looked it up to find any associated YAR rules with it. And what I found was a YAR rule from 2015, and it was still catching samples off the command line argument. So what this tells me is that I need to include this in the end report that I give to the other team since it's remained the same since 2015. It might change tomorrow, but for now, it hasn't. So there was a lot of defense evasion with this sample, and you want to try to include things in the TTP extraction that could be useful for defenders too. Credentialed access. They were trying to get the passwords from browsers. Collection. They were trying to get the mail client info. Command and control, a really helpful tip is using the C2 matrix. You can look at the specific TTPs of the sample that you're extracting and find the specifics and then look on the C2 matrix for something that will work for the purple team exercise. So exfiltration, this is a really good place to consider how your org handles encrypted exfil, as well as to understand how your org handles exfil in general, whether it's encrypted or not. So sometimes you get lucky, and companies will share how the exfil happened during their data breach. So knowing what you do at your org can help you gauge where you're at. Also, as a little side note, I do not recommend using real PII or credit card data for exfilling and testing and exercises. I don't recommend it. So impact with this particular sample, there doesn't seem to be destruction involved. It's not ransomware. It just seems like they're stealing credentials. So once you extract the TTPs, you need to analyze and organize the information. And part of the Purple Team exercise framework provides a template to collect all the TTP information. It also provides suggestions on working with other teams to decide which TTPs to actually test in the Purple Team exercise. So once the TTPs are decided upon, teams can work together to create a plan. And emulate the adversary. This is where the CTI team waits for the rest of the phases of the Purple Team exercise to complete. So now you go back to the Purple Team exercise framework from the threat intel process, where the other team members finish up the preparation for the Purple Team exercise and actually complete the exercise. And just so you know, the CTI analyst can attend the exercise as a spectator if they want. So the lessons learned phase of the Purple Team exercise is where CTI analysts can learn even more about the organization and take these insights back to the products they create for other teams. So through this exercise, you saw a practical example of adversary detection pipelines. You were able to determine that the attacker is looking for browser and email passwords for these key people in your org that are involved with the new revenue generating business initiative. So, through the Purple Team exercise, you can find out how easy it could be to get passwords from those particular users. And the Purple Team exercise can also help you look at your org's visibility, controls, detection, and response. Also, consider if there is a site associated with the initiative that you can access off network. If so, is 2FA enabled? So you were able to support the business initiatives and security team initiatives through understanding your internal attack landscape with the CTI initiatives. The attackers basically don't need to get to full post-exploitation activities for CTI analysts to get value out of the TTPs that the attackers share. You also want to track your progress and the exercises. So, Roberto Rodriguez, the principal threat researcher at Microsoft, also known as Cyber War Dog on Twitter, he has a great resource using Excel for the MITRE ATT&CK Navigator, and it's a heat map, basically tracking hunt team activities. So you can apply the same techniques he shared to your Purple and Adversary emulation exercises. So, beyond lessons learned, commit to intelligence-driven Purple Team exercises, use models, frameworks, processes to make your life easier, like MITRE ATT&CK, Diamond Model, C2 Matrix, Pyramid of Pain, Purple Team exercise framework, YAR rules, Eric Van Buggenhout's threat intel process, and, of course, adversary detection pipelines. Talk with your CTI team and tell them what you need. Of course, pick up a copy of the Purple Team exercise framework. And Jorge Archiles, the CTO of Scythe, put together a free workshop on Purple Team exercises. So check that out. Basically, use all of your org's specific attack data, including the block data, to analyze and create intelligence specific to your organization. So, in this talk, we filtered the entire internet through the business, department, and slash security team and CTI initiatives. We used email attack data, internal sources, and open source reporting to create deliverables based on these initiatives. I showed you a practical example of how adversary detection pipelines would fit into a Purple Team exercise using the Purple Team exercise framework. So I hope the ideas shared with you today help you get more out of your threat intel and finally make your threat intel useful. To close, some Taylor Swift wisdom. CTI analysts can show you incredible things. Thank you for your time. This is my Twitter, LinkedIn, and also the bit.ly link again in case you didn't catch it. And a special thanks to these people. Thank you.